Okay. So because I'm going to talk about climate change, I'm first going to talk about climate and the relationship between art and climate. And we all know that art has been informing about past climate. And during my presentation, you will see that I don't just use paintings, sculptures, but also cartoons, because I've always considered cartoonists as extremely good communicators. In one drawing and a few words, they can actually pass on a pretty good message. So and as a climate change scientist, as any scientist, when we give presentation, we always need a little bit of humor, kind of to release the tension in the audience, which is, stuck to the screen looking at your equations and things. And so we use a lot of cartoons more than art, but we do use art also. So this is a historical document. On the left-hand side, it's a 1850 etching. And next to it in black and white is an 1966 photo. And these two were used in a book about climate written by a French historian who used that to tell us that the climate in the Alps had changed. And so you can see on that beautiful etching, how big that glacier is. I mean, pretty impressive. And then you see in the 1960s how much it has receded. And so I added a photo from 1917 to show you how much the forest, has been taken over. And now instead of being, about here, where it was in the 1960s, it's another good few hundred meters up. Anyway, we all know this, the glaciers are melting, but we wouldn't be able to really, quote, prove it without photography and those etching and paintings that those people have given us. These are gifts for climate change scientists. And of course, and if Hester was on, she would tell me, why are you using the French one? There's also Dutch ones, but I picked the French ones, of course. And this is one of the calendars, Les Très Riches Heures du Duc de Berry, famous. There's one beautiful print for each month of the year. Actually, it's not a print, it's a real watercolor. And they are on display in the Museum of Chantilly. If you ever have a chance to go near Paris, it's really cool. Every month has a different castle and represent different activities in the field. And so when you look at this picture, this is for September. The castle is Saumur, and I've put the map on the right-hand side to show you where Saumur is. It's on the Loire River, and southeast of Brittany. And this, the photo here shows you the castle today, which hasn't changed, but it's gone through the centuries. But what you see on this picture is, people that are actually harvesting grapes. It's the vendange in France. And so that was in late September at the time. And nowadays they're hiring pickers in August. So there has been a shift. And when you look at the temperature, and I picked up the headlines of a recent report, from the 1950s to the 1980s, the average temperature was 11 degrees centigrade. And then mid 80s, it switched by 1 degree C. So you hear a lot about, climate change is plus or minus 1 degree. And it's like in Europe, in Western Europe, there's been a definite shift, and people know it, and farmers are the first one to know it. And the winemakers, definitely. Anybody who has a vineyard knows that things have gotten a lot warmer. There used to be a law in France that would prevent you from irrigating your vineyards, and they had to change that in 2008 because things were getting so dry that some of the vineyards would have died otherwise. But this was like a revolution in France. So anyway, all this to say that these beautiful watercolors actually are giving us some sense of the phenology, so what happened in the field for farmers in the 1400 in this case. And in Holland, we have another calendar in the 1600 that actually shows other activities driven definitely by climate. And I've chosen these two paintings. One is about it was painted by Jules Vernier in 1881, and then another one painted by Denisa Forlatsky in 1900, to show that there's always been fire on land, and that we have been suppressing fire in the last 120 years, but there were big fires before. So when you read in the news, you know, our governor and others in California saying, you know, these are once in a generation event. Well, first of all, there has been big fires before where we live today, but there were a lot less people. And then to say that it's once in a generation doesn't take into account the young people who are seeing this for the first time. But we climate change scientists can tell you this is only the beginning. This is what we're going to be faced with in the future. The climate is getting warmer and drier. So we have big trees, we have a lot of wood to burn. So of course, there's going to be more fires in the future. And so climate change is an interesting subject to study. There is no middle ground as to the scientific reality of climate change. It's either you trust the science or you live in an alternate universe where facts don't seem to matter much. And for some unknown reason, the media has really made this controversy worse. And we now have a political twist to it, with most of the Republican Party denying climate change, and the Democrats being, really stewards of climate change issues in science, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Anybody who has access to the information should clearly see the data is there to show that climate change is happening and we need to do something about it. And so even last summer did not change anybody's mind. And these are two cartoons from David Fitzsimmons, who's one of my favorite cartoonists. He works for the Arizona Daily Star, so he has a lot of climate-related cartoons. And so on the left-hand side, I couldn't miss that one. That's if Ansel Adams had been shooting the West this year. So of course, pictures of fire all over. And then on the right-hand side, it's American Gothic 2020. And I really liked it because, as you know, today is the first day of the Women's History Month. And I love to see the woman with a mask. She's the smart one. She knows the information. She has the mask. And she is, frowning at her husband, who has a torch, a tiki torch, which is probably what started the fire next to their house. Anyway, it's a cartoon, so it's a joke. I am not making fun of the people who are in dire straits and have lost their houses, all their belongings, and I truly admire all the firefighters who put their lives on the line to help people survive the fire. This is not at all what I'm trying to say, but what I'm trying to say is with climate change, there will be more fire, and we need to be aware of it and take action so that loss of property and God forbid lives should never happen in the future. And of course, 2021 started with a beautiful gift for climate change skeptics in Texas. And this is Matt Davis, who's a Newsday Pulitzer Prize winning editorial cartoonist. And all these cartoonists that I have here are also artists who actually do paintings or sculptures, and they write books and illustrate them. And so they're really cool people who have another life apart from being political cartoonists. Okay. And so a little bit about me, my career, just so that you know where I'm coming from. I love this cartoon by John Kudelka, who's from Tasmania. He put together this cartoon showing people who have been involved with the IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. Those of you who were on the previous webinar, you know that IPCC is a panel of about 1,000 scientists who every five to 7 years put together these big reports that summarize all the latest research about climate change, looking at data, looking at trend, and using model results to look into the future. So my career as a climate change scientist started in 1989 in Corvallis, looking at climate change impacts on rice yield in Asia. And a year later, it was the first IPCC report. It was a 1 volume, relatively thin. And we were all saying, okay, the projections show, a real warming, and there's going to be something to deal with, and we need to act on it. In 1995, I actually sent words to the IPCC, so some of my text was included. So I was one of the co-authors, and we were definitely, the conclusion was that, climate change is definitely a problem. And in 1999, I actually took the US citizenship to vote for Al Gore. And all of the climate scientists were really excited, saying the US is going to take the lead. We're going to be the first nation in the world to show what a green economy can be. We're going to create new jobs. We're going to really prepare the population so that it can deal with sea level rise, with acidification of the oceans, with more fires. Anyway, we were full of hope, and you know what happened. Anyway, 2001 was the next IPCC, and this cartoon says it all. We should really be getting on with sorting this thing out pretty soon. In 2007, it was like, okay, we sounded like a broken record. I mean, the thing is, all the models showed the same thing: increased warming, and it's coming, and we're getting there. And in 2007, we even the IPCC, the Nobel committee actually gave the Nobel Peace Prize to Al Gore and to the IPCC as a community. And in 2013, it was the next IPCC report, which was huge. If anybody wants any of those reports, I have them. I'll be glad to give them away. They are great door stoppers. They are really thick, really heavy. And I'm trying to clean up my bookshelves in my office. Great information, but the next one is coming. So in 2019, I just finished reviewing 2 chapters out of the whole set. And so we're going to get these new reports coming in. There's been some delays, so the first publications, written things are going to be next year. But we've already reviewed the first volume, and the second volume is in the process of getting published. So that was my career so far. And so like I said, it's 2020, and I just finished reviewing the last one. So in 2007, like I told you, the IPCC awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. No, the IPCC was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, which was wonderful. But it's like, okay, so what happens next? Did all these reports make any difference? And I put the Edward Munch, the Scream, which is the way we Americans say it. In fact, it's the Scream of Nature in its original German title. Munch was walking on a bridge with his friends and seeing this beautiful red sky at sunset. And he stopped, his friends continued, and he thought that this was something that nature was telling him, that, there was a scream of nature. So this was an interesting story to read about. It's like there was awareness there that something already was going on. And this is a painting that was made in 1893. And unfortunately, all these reports didn't have much of an impact. When you look at the emission, and on the right-hand side, I made one graph of the Global Carbon Project. It's fossil fuel emissions in billions of metric tons of CO2. Doesn't really matter the unit at this point, but you can see that from the 1960 until today, there's been a nice increase. And all these dotted red lines correspond to the volumes of the IPCC when they were published. So you can see that there is no dip down after one of those volumes were published. So that was really depressing and frustrating. And today we can say that economics and pandemics have actually been more effective at bringing emissions down than all the facts and figures that we've been trying to provide. You can see the great reset, the fall of the USSR, the oil crisis in the late 70s, early 80s, and then the great recession of 2008. And now the coronavirus, which has actually brought the emissions down for, of course, the reasons you know. And so Leonardo da Vinci said it himself, art is the queen of all sciences, communicating knowledge to all the generations of the world. So in 2007, I decided, I was organizing a big climate change conference in Portland, Oregon, and I decided that it was time to have an art show and actually asked professional artists, but also kids from schools to tell us what they are thinking about climate change, how they were taking the information we were giving them, and how they were interpreting it. And so in the upper photo shows you a few of the professional artists, and the bottom pictures from the children's show. And the teacher was also a curator, and the judge was a colleague, a friend of mine who's a professional artist, Melody Cotton-Jim. And this was when I lived in Olympia, Washington. So these were kids from Olympia and professional artists from that region. And so when we tried to pick the winner of the professional artist category, we picked Mary Hassett's Requiem was the title of her piece. And it's about a bird that was endangered. And so the brown music sheet you see behind is actually a music partition for the Requiem. And then the little black lines there are actually the recording of the song of that bird. And then she painted the bird on, not painted, she actually embroidered the bird on top of those things. So it was really creative, and but also very depressing. And so rather than depress everybody, I wanted to make sure you knew that this particular bird, the Kirtland warbler, is actually now off the endangered list. I don't know how much her painting or her embroidery made a difference, but we have actually, as the restoration community has actually helped to restore the habitat, and that bird has recovered in Michigan, which is its home, its original home. And so one thing we know as scientists is that success stories are not told often enough. We can tell a journalist, this is really, it's going to get worse, and they're going to write that in the front page of the newspaper. But when we say, this bird is now saved, that does not necessarily make it to the front page. Now, in that show, there was that children's group of pieces, and we had to pick best of show, and we picked this one by Sarah Diamond. And what struck us at the time was that the kids at that age are so desperate that they think that we cannot find a solution for the problems of our world. We have to rely on outer space, on little green men coming onto UFOs to come and give us the solution. And that was very sad to see. We thought, oh my gosh, if that's what a young person think, that we are not able to solve our own problem, that we need to go to outer space to find people smarter than us who solve the problem. We really have a problem as scientists to tell them, we need to be more positive about the future. And more recently, I found on the website a virtual art show from students from Canada who actually put some very well-written explanations of their art pieces that they've submitted. And Kayla from grade 12, she didn't put a title on her piece, but she said, it's a long writer, but she said, I chose to use black as a base for the fire to be painted onto to create the feeling of destruction that wildfire brings. Now, if you pay attention to this, there is no house, there's no person. So when she says what the destruction that wildfire brings, it's not to human, to society, it's to nature. It's killing the trees, and it's really affecting even the wildlife, the deer. So, think about Bambi and things like that. And I think this is really a failure of scientists to communicate the other side of fire, which is a lot of species actually need fire to survive. So there are species of woodpeckers, of course, who really look for burned wood. So, the black trees that remain after a fire, and they put their eggs into these, now empty and burned trunks. And you have trees like sequoias or lodgepole pine who actually need fire so that their green cone actually open in the fire and the seeds are released. If there's no fire, they cannot reproduce because their seeds are stuck in those cones. So we really need a paradigm shift. We'll have to learn to live with fire because that's in our future. But fire also creates good wildlife habitat. And it's also really important for long-term carbon storage. Everybody knows that, charcoal is really a long-term carbon storage. Fire also resets the stage. It kills insects, it kills diseases, it cleans up. And something that one of our last speakers in the series said, you know, it leaves survivors. Fire is patchy. Not everything burns in a big fire. And it's those survivors who ensure the future of any ecosystem. And in the West, in the Western US, fire is what created what we live with today in our forests. And so it's really something we need to be aware of. And we also need to be aware of how we've changed the system and made it more vulnerable, but that fire is not the enemy. And so knowing it is not enough. We really must apply. Being willing is not enough. We must do. That's another Da Vinci quote that I really like. And so in 2019, before we were all confined, there was the largest climate change meeting in the world. Happens every December in San Francisco. And in 2019, I was there. And as I was walking from the hotel, I saw this beautiful mural. And of course, if there's one person who wants action, Greta Thunberg certainly is. And the person who painted that is Andres Petrocelli. And what he said was, we're pretty much at the beginning of our extinction. So if we don't do anything right now, it's going to be too late. So the message that Greta has been passing, I want you to feel the fear I feel every day, and then I want you to act. Actually, she's been very effective at passing that along. Now, the attention span of the public is another question, but at least her message has reached quite a bit of people, quite a few people, especially the younger generation. And art is a powerful medium that encourages human connection and positive social change. And so I wanted to show you a few exhibits that I took pictures of that deal with climate change. And I thought we're really passing an important message that society could respond to. So this is an exhibit that was an installation that existed in 2013 in Nantes in France. And it has 14 life-size figures of men floating in a moat. So they're all in suits. And so it's described as impassive businessmen in waiting for climate change. They twist and turn at the mercy of the moat's current. It was just a reflection of the inertia, the lack of action from people who actually could make decisions and change our future. And then I really like this beautiful painting by Yuko Shimizu. She worked on a painting for a journal that actually does not exist anymore, a magazine that doesn't exist anymore. But this was to illustrate what architects and engineers are exploring to make buildings and infrastructure more resilient. And of course, in 2011, there was the big tsunami in Japan. And so the wave was very impactful at the time in 2013. The interesting story about this particular illustration was that the journal that doesn't exist anymore was called Green Source, but she prepared 3 different drawings that she was going to paint for and prepare for that magazine. And you know, there were 2 where you could see the hands that were actually saving the cities from this, from the water, from the rising water. But no, the editor chose the big wave that was no doubt going to hit that big bubble and the city in the middle. So it's interesting how you can really change the message by the way you present the information, even in art. In 2015, the United Nations Global Goals for Sustainable Society asked Fred Martins to illustrate the issues. And Fred was really interested in biodiversity issues, and he's from Nigeria. And so he picked a few species and represented them. And all these species are individual prints with that word global warming on it. And so it was also extremely powerful, these drops of blood from their mouths. And he has a lot more animals in this. If you can look him up on the web. If you're a person interested in species and biodiversity, this was really, but to me, it's a very depressing view of what is happening, but also very impactful, of course. And this one was in 2017 at the Venice Biennale. 2 large hands emerging from the Grand Canal by Lorenzo Quinn. And so what he says was, I wanted to make a statement on climate change and the role that people must play in supporting Venice's unique world heritage. The hands hold so much power, the power to love, to hate, to create, to destroy. So we're getting this message that, yes, we're getting climate change, but we can do something about it. We created climate change, so we can do something about it. And so art calls us to look at things through a different lens. And so I'm going to show you a few examples of art shows. This is a really cool little exhibit of global warmings, it's called, by Paula Winokur, that was shown in 2005. And on that, it's a series of Earths that have a crack. And all those cracks are there visible, and there's nice colors in them. And what she's showing is greenhouse gas emissions. And so on that one of the Earths that I've put there on the left-hand side, it said, we've already pumped out enough greenhouse gases to warm the planet for decades to come. So that was also a pretty nice exhibit that was very telling. And, it's hard to make art about greenhouse gases. And I thought this one, if you wanted to show emissions from the planet, that was really, really clever. And then, of course, you just heard Dee Karen talk about the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma. And so this was Alexei Rockman in 2005 who did this beautiful painting of the dust storm with these sheep, totally unaware of what's happening, and this huge cloud of dust coming towards them. And and this is a picture of Texas in 1935 during the Dust Bowl, showing these big clouds of dust that engulfed a lot of the prairie, the southern prairie. And then in the picture above is in 2012 in Phoenix. This is one of the best pictures I could find of what we're getting today. They call them haboobs now, using the Arabic term, because over there it's pretty common to have desert dust flying around, but we are getting them here, and they're not advertised. If you have families or relatives or friends in the Southwest, you know that they're happening now pretty much every year. But it's pretty scary when you're there. A couple of years ago, we were driving towards El Paso, and the wind started blowing, and there was a lot of dust. It was nothing as sensational as this, but we started talking to people there, and they told us that, yeah, haboobs happen all the time, and you stop seeing anything on the freeway. You have to stop because it's so pervasive, so thick. So these are also phenomena that are happening today. And of course, what happens to the dust is it goes in the mountains and deposits on the snow, the white snow, and then increases the speed of the melting, because it's changing the albedo, the reflectivity of the white. So these are not only important for the people who live in these dry areas, but also for the mountainous area that get that dust that the wind pulls there. And so when I give talks about climate change, I show a lot of model results that are talking about vegetation shifts. As the climate is getting warmer and we're getting drier summers, vegetations are changing, and disturbances like fire are actually facilitating these shifts. And so I've always loved these photos from Igor Zinin. This one is called In the Midst. And I always say, reality check. The trees are not going to pick up their roots and move. But I thought this was really a beautiful illustration of what vegetation shifts could be. And then on the right-hand side, Shauna and Robert Park Harrison have a series of really fabulous photos that illustrate human activities. And this is burning season. And to me, it's always looked like the desperation of trying to extinguish a fire with what we can. And we will not be able to fight all the future fires. And that's all there is to it. We're going to have to live with them and prepare for them. So this is about glacier melting. Diane Burko has these giant paintings that show how the ice is now breaking up. And you can see from the sky blue coming through, meaning the white of the ice is getting broken down, and you can see the melting. It's really beautiful. They are huge paintings. If you ever have a chance to go see those show, it's really impressive. James Balog is a photographer, and he makes movies of the melting of the glacier. He's installed cameras in the Arctic, in Greenland, looking at the melting of the glacier. And he has this great movie called Chasing Ice. And to show the importance, not only of, these glaciers that are melting and disappearing, but nobody lives in Greenland, or very few people. It doesn't really affect us in Covarrubias. But then he has all these photos from around the world of children standing next to their mother, and the level of water that would be the consequence of all the melting of these glaciers. And those are extremely powerful photos. And again, this is an artist who wants to tell people, it's happening and we need to do something about it. And above that, you have a chart, which is the decrease in glacier mass balance. And this is by Jill Pelto. And this is actually the data points, those little dots that you see at the top of the glacier mass there, are actually real data corresponding to the 1918 to 2014 melt in the Washington North Cascade. And Jill will be giving a talk on March 11th for our series in the show I'll talk about at the very end here. But she does a lot of beautiful watercolor using the data and being very creative about making it in art pieces. Daniela is in Portland, and what she does to show the melting of the glacier is she puts shapes of different color on the paper, and she tells you that the shapes represent the pieces of land where ice has melted away. She actually teaches in Portland at the Pacific Northwest College of Art. And so her project isn't just a way to convey information, it's a way to confront grief. So really powerful pieces, also very large. Excuse me. So in December 2019, before the pandemic hit really hard, there was the COP25, the climate summit in Madrid. The Museum del Prado decided with funding from the WWF, World Wildlife Fund, to update its masterpieces and to illustrate the chaos that could be unleashed by climate change. So on the left-hand side, you have the piece, the El Caballo, Philip IV, by Velázquez. So the new painting is now, the horse underwater. The middle piece shows the, excuse me, whoops, I'm sorry. Shows the migrant camps in the back, in gray. So you have the parasol and the original painting above, and then you have the migrant camp in the bottom with climate refugee on the umbrella. So it's not migrants because of they want to migrate and come to a country, but because they have to, because their country is in trouble. And then on the right-hand side, this is Sorola's paintings, Boys on the Beach, and the update is with all these dead fish because the water is so polluted, or the water is so warm that the fish cannot survive. So the title of the exhibit was 1.5 degrees centigrade changes everything. And it's been, the governments have been saying we need to stay under 1.5 degrees C, which is very unlikely. So last year, last year in February, I was actually in Nashville giving a talk with actually Dick Arndt, who did the webinar an hour ago. And I went to this exhibit, The Environmental Impact 2. It's a traveling show about environmental issues, and there's lots of those related to climate change. And so I really like the Bart Walker climate change painting. Of course, it's a polar bear and the melting ice. Beautiful piece. And then this one, which is a painting by Karen Hackenberg, Have an Ice Day, with a bear with sunglasses and this beautiful sea with not an ice cube on it, really warm seas. There were 50 pieces in that show and 20 artists. And so art can really help projecting a future that we are going to be responsible for. This is a photo that I got out of The Guardian taken by Paul Sansom in Hanoi this year. Very recently, actually, it's like a few weeks ago. And we don't have to show dire futures. This John Pitcher actually was hired by the National Park Service to illustrate how the Olympics would change with climate change. And so Olympic National Park in the summer of 2010, and Olympic National Park in the summer of 2100. So you see the changes. The glaciers are not so long, and then you have different animals. You know, the marmots are gone, but you get the red-tailed falcon and red-tailed hawk, I'm sorry, and the deer that you didn't have before. And you see that the vegetation has changed. You get a lot less snow. So just trying to tell people it's going to change, but it doesn't have to be dire. And you see fire. A lot of the people in the Park Service said, you know, if we have small fires, if we let the fire do its thing, then we will eventually become resilient to it. Instead of having catastrophic fires that will take all of it, we can have small fires that happen every year with some smoke, instead of, you know, preventing all fire in national parks and then having these catastrophic fire that take everything off. So we need to really encourage the next generation. There's a paper, several papers, by Julia Bench, who particularly focused on climate change, and she talked about learning about climate change in, with, and through art. This is how-to for teachers to really get those students not scared, not despairing about climate change. She said art has a potential to transform society. It has a capacity to support agency and inspire feelings of hope, responsibility, and care. It's all that has been known for a long time. And aesthetic practices can contribute to deep emotional learning about sustainability. So I think that's a really important message that all of us need to take to heart. And I love this particular paintings of or illustration by Maria Durang for The Walrus, which is another journal, a magazine, and, you know, showing flooding, fires, and the title of that particular piece was, you know, what do you read during all these extreme events? And so this is, I'm going to show you a few examples of what those young people from Canada have put together to show how they feel about climate change. It's a virtual community art space exhibition, and the students are from the Robert Bateman Secondary School, and it's the classes in art activism. And it's in partnership with the Reach Gallery Museum in Abbotsford, BC. And this is from this year. So Paige Harder here has shown you humanity, you know, the figure of a person in the middle in blue. On the left-hand side, you have the industrial world, hot, so red, and then dark because it's all industry. And on the right-hand side, it's nature. She kept the bright colors because she said nature is so beautiful. It offers us a lot of color, but it's much more diverse than on the industrial side. Again, telling people we have a choice. We will choose whether we want to go with the industrial or the natural way moving forward. So this is another student, Fiona Seaburn, and she calls her piece Future in Our Hands. This is a large piece too. The awareness is there, the information is there, and the understanding is there. So why is nothing happening? These are her words. What we often forget is that deeply connected to power is responsibility. With my art, I hope to show that the human race has the future of the earth in our hands. I hope to inspire others with my art and to do my part in helping people understand that we have to act. We don't need to have everything figured out, but we need to start because the earth is dying in our hands and we are just watching. Daniela Arenas, she's originally from Bogota, Colombia. She's a junior at the College of Charleston, South Carolina. She's one of the 3 winners of the Student Art Expression of the Year program. And she says, her piece is right above her there. You can see the blue with the aeolian, the barn, the solar panels, the trees. And then on the red side, you know, industry and ships that spew out a lot of diesel fume, that sort of thing. And the tree have dead and have green on the blue side. And 2 different types of colored hands. This was very important to her. I believe art speaks to people and it can influence how people feel and act. The message behind this, which I've titled Not Yours, Not Mine, It Is Ours, is to show everyone the reality of what human-caused global warming is doing to our world and hopefully make us take action. When viewers see this painting, my hope is that it prompts them to understand that it's in our own hands to change the world. I thought that was pretty powerful and pretty amazing writing for these students. They have really thought about it. Now this one is the best one. Taylor Wickens, she's a grade 12, also untitled. And she said, we will have to put out the flame that has already been lit. It has now become our duty to fix our ancestors' mess. That's us. This is what is showcased in my piece. Because nothing was done, it is up to the next generation to restore the earth. That's a pretty dire statement and, you know, accusation of us. And so this is one of my favorite quotes. Nothing in life is to be feared. It's only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we may feel less. That brings me to that lecture series that I'm putting together. It started on February 18th and it will continue until March 25th. And the title of the show is What Will Nature Do? And I've asked 9 colleagues to give a talk talking about climate change science and the somewhat positive aspects of climate change and our responsibilities. And so the first 3 speakers were Steve Wanzel, and his take home was, you know, through land use, we've already transformed the landscape. We did those changes. So climate change is just, you know, a change that may actually be smaller than what we've already done to the landscape. Then Jason Dunham told us about the playbook of fish, which makes them actually fairly adaptable to changes in condition. And then David Shaw, who's a phytopathologist, talked to us about conservative optimism, how survivors are actually who ensure our future, or the future of the ecosystem they live in. And a couple hours ago, Dick Arndt told us how important it was to know that, taking his example as an Okie in Oklahoma, the difference between a very dry, a very intense drought in the 50s and another drought, but less intense in the 30s, and how people were much more prepared in the 50s and so did not suffer as much because there was education, because people cared, because the injustices were less. And so how we can prepare society to what happens by getting ready for what we are telling everybody is coming to us. So these are the next speakers. On the right-hand side, Dick, the weather guy, has already spoken. Next Monday will be John Abatsoglu talking about fire. Erika Fleischman will talk about birds and butterflies, or species, and how species deal with climate change. Greg Jones will talk about vineyards and how climate change makes actually life easier for vineyard owners in Oregon and how our wines are getting better. Jill Pelto will show you how she does these wonderful watercolors using data from her dad, but also some that she collected herself. And then Lizzie McLeod will talk to us about coral reef. She works for TNC, the Nature Conservancy, and she's been involved with climate change issues for at least 10, 12, 15 years. So sign up. If you are an artist, if you're interested, sign up and engage. You have to sign up and at least listen to 1 or 2 talks before you can submit your art. The submissions are July 1st, 2021. The exhibit will run from September 30th to November 13th. And in between the end of the talk, so March 25th and July 1st, all those scientists will be glad to interact with you, to learn about you. And I just talked to Cynthia a moment ago and talking about how we will probably have some discussion panels, artist meetups, to find out what people are thinking, what they're creating. And I can tell you that all the speakers are super excited to see how they're going to inspire you to do something with art. And I can tell you that if it's something that can be used in their future presentation, they will use them. So thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate.